Welcome to today's Pharmatech and USP webinar, PCM Equipment Design, Bringing the Pieces Together. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. Next. Each registration is unique and grants the rights for the individual registrant only to view this webinar. Sharing this webinar with unregistered viewers, either during or after its performance, violates USP's copyright and is prohibited. Next. If you have not done so already, we ask that you take some time to read the USP Education Course disclaimer. You can download this presentation, including the disclaimer, from your USP Education account. Please follow the instructions in your confirmation email to download this presentation. Next. Presenting today is Richard Steiner, Pharmatech Associate Senior Manager, Business Strategy for PCM. Welcome, Richard.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone out there. I will stop my video and start with the agenda for my presentation. Yeah, first I will give an introduction about what is PCM, what is behind this acronym, and how to define it. I will have a quick view on a comparison and benchmarking batch versus PCM, what is a good idea to compare processes with. I will then go into an overview of very typical and known vendors out there who are delivering equipment for oral solid dosage continuous processes. We'll talk about interfaces and why and what's so important to consider about them. Integration, also another nice and interesting word to have a little dive into. And then last but not least, in an outro, what else to consider. Okay, so yeah, this is my little chessboard, which will pop up time by time during my presentation. And I use this to draw my thoughts, and I think every engineer is doing this as well on a piece of paper sometimes, and to guide you on the journey, bringing pieces together for your solution. And going on with that, of course, everyone is familiar with how a typical batch process for oral solid dosage products might look like. So you have a material handling section, dispensing areas, then you go into a typical blending, tumble blending process. You have your wet granulation, dry granulation, whatever is the granulation technology you choose. Having another blending and then going to your tableting, for example, or capsule filling, whatever is your final end dose. In a typical batch process, this is happening consecutively, one after the other, with intermediates maybe delivered in bins from one to another suite. And so, that's a typical starting point everyone knows and is familiar with. Continuous, basically use similar, if not the same, unit operations and delivering the material continuously from one to another. And that's, if you will, so the major difference. I will come up quickly with some definitions. It was already in 2015 when ASTM brought out first kind of a standard for this technology. And there was this word, and I want to read this out and give you an idea later why this is so important to consider. So continuous process, a process where during normal operation, raw materials are continuously fed into the system at the same time as acceptable product is continuously removed from the system. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's clear. But then the question is, what is considered really to be continuous? Because there are also unit operations which might be considered as transforming materials in a discrete way, also called semi-continuous operations. But this is no conflict. This basically says continuous processes can be combined of a continuous flow regime element as well as a discrete flow discrete element. There's not a contradiction in the definition, and this is why I think we talk about PCM, pharmaceutical continuous manufacturing. In this year, the beginning of this year, ICH came out with the Q13 guideline, where I think it's described a little bit more simpler. So you have some unit operations operating in a batch mode, where others are integrated and operate in a continuous mode. And this, of course, counts for drug substance as well as drug product manufacturing. So you can integrate unit operations, and I think this is the point I want to make. PCM, pharmaceutical continuous manufacturing, you have to at least 2 unit operation to combine to one another before we talk about a PCM process. What are benefits? Very quickly, in the development space, of course, known faster DOE, because you can adjust process parameters on the way you transfer or you process the material, and you can so far much quicker see the effect. And this will help you not only do your DOE work faster, but also less material in use. You also generate much more data second by second. So in your development process, you typically have a much faster pace. Depending on the processes you use, you can also influence pharmacokinetics. As an example, if you consider hot melt extrusion as part of this. Technology transfer is another important benefit for PCM. If you have the same or similar equipment, you may even basically be even faster in this space, if not skip technology transfer if you do it on the same equipment. And so you can save time to market and no scale up efforts are needed if you again use the similar or same equipment even. And the commercial productions case, you have shorter lead times, yield gains, cost savings to expect from operator FTE numbers employed, but also on quality assurance, quality cost savings are to be expected, as well as lower facility costs. You have lower footprint of the equipment, and then also containment and cleaning can be substantially improved. I will talk about this a little bit because until now there's always the impression out there that in particular when it comes to cleaning processes or this kind of equipment might be more troublesome. Less energy consumption as you have an intensified process. And with that, finally also, I think it's becoming more and more a key topic, sustainability, because of lower and less utility consumption in a nutshell. To benchmark this process, I use, and I suggest to use the well-known OEE equation, overall equipment effectiveness. I know that this is in the industry not always used in the same way. So some companies use it only for certain unit operations and have their specific definition about it. But the point I want to make, and for bringing pieces together, I think it's important to look at these unit operations quite closely and to say, okay, what is the performance really defined? What is the yield to expect from this unit operation? And what is the availability I give to use this asset for my manufacturing team? And it's a nice tool to compare and to explain what are the differences between both technologies. Again, bringing back these unit operation views, Each of them have a particular OEE. Where you see, let's say, more manual work, of course, the OEE is lower. There are also unit operations already today which will run on a very high utilization and a very high OEE level, typically compression, because it's already a kind of a continuous flow, if you will, or if you go to coating. You can see this, and these might be not really detailed number, but particular comparable number. So in batch operation, again, unit operations work one after the other, and this causes I have to multiply this OEE factor, and then of course everyone can understand that the OEE over the whole process is pretty low. Comparing this now with the continuous system, basically, and that's the thing, as these unit operations work together at the same time, they will follow either the one with the highest OEE in the best case or the lowest. But in both cases, you see as this process goes on at the same time and together, you have a higher OEE. And with this, you can create a higher productivity. And I think this is one of the key parts why and where the benefit of continuous manufacturing is to be expected. Of course, again, it is how you operate the equipment, but it's also how you design and bringing the pieces together. And this is, of course, the main topic of this presentation. Let's go back to my chessboard and let's look at these elements a little bit more closer. So you have typically wise a material handling section. Material flows with whatever technology of by gravity or pneumatically to the next level where you have dosing, blending. So you have typically wise always a material handling level, dispensing, change it from a bin into an IBC or a bottle or a big bag or whatever mean you bring in the material to your facility. You have to think about this material handling, because I think there's no really anything which is more important in a continuous process with a continuous dosing and blending equipment to bring all the inbound material in a continuous as possible way into the next position, dosing, blending, before it then goes into the granulation level. So let's consider you have a granulation process and it's necessary. You will have then the selection of a couple of technologies. We will look into them as well. There's then typically wise another dosing blending step to bring you external phase to the product. And finally, you go to tableting or capsule filling or film coating, whatever you have on the last step. So we will walk through to that. And these are, typical companies we can see on this journey. Again, I want to say this is not an exhaustive list of companies, but all companies which we have seen in this field with installations and having offers out there who are really focusing on continuous manufacturing very much. And I will, in this overview, show some cases and give you some guidance what might be important to select. So a very important disclaimer here as well. This is not an exhaustive list. I know there are some more companies out there, but I think that's the most prominent companies. So let's start with material handling. In some cases, it's enough to have for a smaller batch, of course, a bottle or an IBC, but also you have to think on how to fill this IBC and how is this IBC prepared. But if you go into bigger production scale with higher quantities, of course, the consumption of the raw material is getting higher. So you either have automated bin preparation, blend preparation devices, or you have super bags or big bags. So this is possible. So what you see here on these pictures are real installations and pharmaceutical applications, and you can already understand that there are some bigger consumptions behind and some bigger throughputs possible. And you will see typical vendors who are capable to provide then the raw material inbound to your process. This can happen by pneumatic conveying means, dense phase, pneumatic, or even just gravity flow, if you will. But usually you see already in this stage from the mentioned companies here, devices to transfer raw materials in low as well as high volume from from the inbound package form into the loss in weight feeder, which is the next level of interest. Or you have IBCs, as mentioned before. These docking stations are also quite interesting because, as you can see on these pictures here, in particular on the one in between, as this equipment can be built quite flexible for different products. Also, the material handling has to be either the same way flexible and give you the opportunities to change the capacity for your refilling. And these IBCs also have, or these docking stations have also a very particular function to make sure that the material really is flowing well out of the IBC into the pneumatic or the gravity flow down to the loss in weight feeders. A loss in weight feeder, which I will elaborate next on, is of course the heartbeat for every Conti system. This loss in weight feeding technology is well described in lots of publications. I will not go into the details here, other than saying that the principle is always the same. You have a balance with measuring the material in a hopper and then measuring the weight, the loss of weight over time in this hopper, when the means the twin screw or the screw is taking material out of this hopper. The particular technology is not only used since short, no, it's I think many decades used already in many industries. So it's a robust and well-developed technologies, and you can find a couple of well-established vendors there who have then, in as more the request came from the pharmaceutical or industry, have modified their products to support to be GMP-like, to follow what is required for the pharmaceutical industry. Here again, just a few to mention. The problem now for someone saying, how bring I put this together and what is the right choice? That's a valid question, but so you have to look in your application. You have to see if your material, how does this material behaves. You have to test it on one of these feeders, and then the refilling. And now back to the material handling is evenly important. It does not make any sense to have a very precise feeder if the material is not coming in frequently. So this this dance between the refilling and the feeding technology, the feeding scale, is very important for precise and accurate feeding over a long time, because we have a continuous process which we want to run as long as possible without interruptions. Yeah. So here the feeding of cohesive or electrostatic material could be a challenge. Or if you have, let's say, MUPS applications with very fragile granules. So there's a lot in this material characteristics which you have to discover. And this loss and weight feeder again is the heartbeat of the system. So you have to serve it in the best possible way. The capacity range is a big question. What are these vendors offering as a range of feeding technology? So you can see their experience also in the range they are offering, as well as in the details of how the powder conveying system is designed. So how many options do you have? And each of these brands have developed, meanwhile, their specific technologies. You can test them with these vendors, and then you can feel and learn about their experience. And so the best way to choose the right loss and weight feeder is by testing and looking into this very closely. Beside that, of course, some of them have very different load cell technologies, which have an impact on the precision of the feeding. Also, the control algorithms and the control strategies around the feeder are very important to discover. And last but not least, then you go really into the GMP design aspects. How easy is it to take such a feeder apart, and the cleaning solutions, if you will. So again, I think this gives you a small guideline, but here I think that's the really essential part, talking about OSD, continuous pharmaceutical manufacturing. The next step is usually creating then a dry blend of what is fed by these feeders. And also here you have, unfortunately, fortunately, a huge variety of possibilities. And it's almost the same level of portfolio you can see from the feeder suppliers, as they usually have also dry blending tools right on their portfolio. These dry blenders, even if they look on a picture quite differently, but I think they are either really linear blenders, which are kind of looking like single screws with pedals to create distributive mixing, or capabilities where you can change the pedals to a more dispersive mixing. So depending on the case, on the product, also these blending technologies can look different and have to be thoroughly investigated before you choose what is the best one for you, or for your application, for your range, and for your expected throughput capacity. Between these linear blenders, they can be also declined, vertical, or there's recently became also more and more prominent again, the mini batch blending. I talked about this before, whether something is continuous or semi-continuous. Here you can get already an idea that if we talk about mini batch blending, it's a semi-continuous way, but it found interesting application, in particular when it came to very low quantities, very low API percentages to be blended homogeneously. It makes sense to look into this technology as well. Or if you have a unit operation before, where you have basically already a semi-continuous process and material buckets coming out of this semi-continuous process, but have to be added with external phase, for example. So it's really important to look to your process flow, and then to see what is the best mean for the next operation. And but be sure you have quite a selection today possible to do, and fitting for your purpose. Also, this needs to be tested. You can find, meanwhile, vendors who have designed for your application basically pre-combined dosing blending rigs or dosing blending platforms where they have already put their experience in. And so it makes it easier for you to decide or to install such an equipment, because the work of integration has been already done. Of course, you have to look in to these devices as well under the viewpoint of capacity, and see what is the flexibility of the equipment. Can I choose different feeders in combination on the same platform with different kind of blending devices and so on? What is the ergonomics? Is getting more and more important. How to approach this kind of dosing blending platforms or rigs or systems for easier changeover and for easier handling. As we heard at the beginning, cleaning is a big part and a big concern. So here again today, I think much more offers available for your task, whether this is now a dosing blending rig you will put on the compression machine, on the capsule filler, or whatever is the down or upstream process. These kind of offerings are pretty flexible in the installation. Okay, material handling, dosing blending. Next step might be granulation. And I do not want to give a seminar about granulation here, but just high level. Granulation is important to provide best possible flowing material to the compression machine, because as we know, compression is all high-speed compression machines today need to be fed as good as possible with flowable material. So this is still one reason to consider agglomeration technologies. And in continuous manufacturing even more, as you have these loss in weight feeding devices which are sensitive to the flowability of the product as well. So in some cases, even raw materials coming in today are maybe granulated or agglomerated before at the raw material supplier to provide a best flowable product for your loss and weight feeding devices. Still, there are different technologies like wet granulation, very prominently, as we know, dry granulation as well. Big part of the installations you see have dry granulation operations integrated, and also melt granulation is very popular if you look to installed continuous manufacturing rigs. There was the expectation that continuous direct compression will take over much more market space in the future on the cost of these granulation technologies. But what could be experienced the last couple of years, I think there is to any of or the most of the direct compression systems, there's either again a fluid melt granulation, dry granulation, melt granulation, wet granulation, or even a fluid bed granulation process beforehand in the game. This will remain a solution, and I think we will nonetheless see that this direct compression application will gain more and more market space as companies try to find their way into the more simpler or solid dosage processing part. Let's look now into dry granulation. In many of today's continuous rigs, you can find implementations of dry granulation processes already. It is, I think, a common technology. In particular, when it comes to a certain range of APIs, let's say 5 to 30%. If you have more, let's say, melt granulation, of course, then this is not so much considered. But dry granulation is one of the main routes today on continuous manufacturing rigs. And here you can see different vendors again, which are very prominent out there, and which all of them have their solutions how to integrate these roller compactors into a continuous manufacturing rig. It is important to say, okay, it's about the installed base. It is the question how to control and force feed this device. The active gap control is a topic. How easy is it to interchange parts and like the rollers? The upscaling is a topic, as well as the modeling around these devices. As we see more and more predictive modeling applications on direct compression systems, of course, this goes further than saying what is the modeling capability for these kind of devices. And so these are questions to discuss with the vendor, but even more also with your system integrator. Wet granulation, still one of the big topics in the market. You can also here see different solutions. In the first glance, you say, okay, this looks familiar. It might be a twin screw principle, but not in all cases. So there are companies out there like PowerX, for example, they have a very specific, I call it helix spiral granulation device, not necessarily the screw principle, I would say, or you have what is from Lödige offered, the ring granulator. But most prominently, you see, of course, twin screw principles used for high shear wet granulation purposes with a couple of well-known brands. Here is important, if you select this kind of equipment, you have to look into, first of all, how is the ability of self-emptying, I would call it. So how good is this equipment in emptying after you switch off the process? What is about the flexibility of the screw geometries? What is the outer to inner diameter? What is the torque capability of this kind of device? And how is the bearing of the screws, that you make sure that these elements are not touching one another? What is about the temperature control? And what is the flexibility on the length of the process itself? So can I really use it just for wet granulation? And I think this is what you can see here on those pictures. These machines are really, let's say, tailor-made for wet granulation purpose. And so these questions you have to go through to say, okay, what is the best fitting equipment for my purpose? Right after the wet granulation, of course, you have the fluid bed drying. This mostly comes together because the granulator as well the fluid bed dryer in a kind of, there's a system interface already in between, but these two unit operations are working very closely together, and this interface is not so easy to manage between one of these unit operations. You see today either these segmented fluid bed dryers where you have static segments or moving segments, like the glatt Modcos system, for example. But if you will, here again, you go from a continuous flow regime from the twin screws or from the helix or the single screw granulation device into a quasi-continuous or semi-continuous fluid bed process. The exception here is designs like from Lödige with a continuous fluid bed dryer, where you can see already on this big screw here conveying then the wet granules through to the fluid bed cell, or recently a continuous fluidized bed dryer from Bohle, which is a kind of a vibratory system, gently delivering the granules on a bed through an air bed through the process to dry the granules. So all of these processes work fine and are established in the market and have references. You have to choose also here on your process capability and your process requirements, which is the best technology. It can also be a question of how does one or the other fit in the room, how is the ergonomics, how to handle these processes. So that's quite a unit operation to have a closer look to. So here, summary: plug flow versus continuous flow, segmented versus rotary cells, transfer of the wet granules between the twin screw into the fluid bed. What are filter cleaning cycles? Important to consider. Transferability is a topic if you have a development unit and you will go to scale it up to the commercial unit. How is this possible to transfer the technology? Temperature control, footprint I mentioned, and yeah, you can see on the installed base, of course, the experience of these vendors. Quickly also getting more and more prominent are the fluid bed granulation technologies. Here prominently from Syntegon Xelom, which I want to highlight because this is again a typical example. Yeah, you feed in continuously material into a blending device, you go into this fluid bed granulation system where basically the granulation takes place at the same time drying happens, but you have these five let's say cells where this is happening. So you have this semi-continuous element again, and then you use the material plugs of the granuled material conveying it to the compression machine. But before that, there is another blending technology. So you have here a nice combination of continuous flow regime, semi-continuous flow regime, and basically finally again a continuous flow regime in one combination. And that's what PCM stands for. Also here you can find spray agglomeration technologies already on the market, like from company Glatt. And yeah, it's another example. What is important here, your granulation technology is dependent on the application you're looking for, because certainly this kind of granules have a specific different structure to consider. Last but not least, melt granulation and hot melt extrusion. I think if you would look at these devices, you would first say, okay, this is a twin screw. Of course, this looks familiar to the wet granulation twin screw process I mentioned before, but basically this is where this technology came from kind of melt extrusion technologies from the chemical industry, from the plastic conversion industry. And then these devices have been modified and used differently for pharmaceutical granulation technology. In other words, for melt granulation and hot melt extrusion is the home base of this technology. If you see these machines a little bit closer, you will recognize that they have a much more sophisticated temperature control, because you have to deal in melt granulation, hot melt extrusion with higher processing temperatures, but usually also with a much longer process length. The barrel lengths or the barrel segments are double as long in some cases, because you do more operational or processes within this unit. So it's more complex by the temperature control. It usually also provides higher torque for more torque requiring processes. But yeah, here these are all very famous and well-established brands out there who have then also finally designed GMP-like extrusion systems. What I want to quickly show is what happens after this. So you go, as you have a temperature, to cool down rather than to dry something. You can find so-called cooling towers, vibratory towers from a brand called Vibra. They have a couple of nice installations together with twin screw melt granulation processes. But here on this picture, the same thing. You have a loss and weight feeder where the pre-blend goes in, you melt, granulate the product, you go to a vibratory screen, then a vibratory tower, while the material is conveyed up the way it's getting more and more cool, and these granules then go afterwards into a sieve, into a kind of a dry mill to calibrate the product. So yeah, you have basically here in just one picture at least 4 unit operations integrated, and this is quite a nice way of doing continuous processing for pharmaceuticals. Let's talk about the next step, which is tableting. There's always dosing blending in between. I will skip that because basically that's the same as we have already discussed. Same vendors, same blending technologies, so nothing specific here. But the compression machines is something to look into. Because here, besides these 3, there are a couple of more vendors who have already also experience in this field. Important to look at is the compression technology is used. What is the feeder technology? How is this device controlled by the upstream process? What is the master? What is the servant in the process? How is this machine connected? And to make sure that between the dosing blending system, you have no risk of segregation. Tableting ends usually with film coating. Also here, good news. Many vendors, meanwhile, offer coating equipment fitting to the compression machines. They are all kind of quasi-continuous or semi-continuous as well. And you have to find the best choice for your application. It's about the coating principle. It's about the coating accuracy, the speed to keep and cope up with the compression machine. Is it scalable by throughput or is it fixed by throughput? Going back to my OEE equation, you should make sure that the coating process basically finally is not a limiting or bottleneck process. Yeah? What is your haptic expectations? What is typical containment and cleaning philosophy around these devices? Going to the interfaces, you have material handling, dosing, blending, wet granulation, dry dosing, blending again, tableting, tablet coating. So you have mechanical interfaces as well, not only the material flow to consider, you have mechanical integration work to do. But there's also a process integration interface. So these processes are working and talking to one unit operation and the other in the same way. So you can see in some cases that these are intrinsic own processes. Pneumatic conveying, dense phase conveying, for example, you have to understand this process. You have to design this process that the unit operations on a higher level can work together flawlessly. And last but not least, the control. So the big question, who owns the interface? You can pick and choose and bring in your pieces together, but you have to define who owns the interface. Is this you, your own company, your own engineering team? Because you take over to be in charge of that. Not only that, to put another level of complexity, you have PET tools mostly somewhere in between these unit operations to foresee that they also get their possibility to test the material, the quality of the intermediates on the way through to this process. So in other words, bringing the pieces together, you have a huge selection of vendors with different capabilities and capacities and portfolio. But the real tricky thing is then to get this together. Who owns the interface? And last but not least, also on which level is this put together? You can see from history of PCM already, that some go the horizontal way or the vertical way. I think more and more it's clear and common, depending on the flexibility of the facility, of course, that ergonomically it's better to have it on one floor at least, or maybe one or two floors, that for the operators, the cleaning or taking it apart is easier. So on the left side, this is the PCM installation of Pfizer, which is a nice example. They also used a very specific blending technology to make it more compact, or the well-known Vertex rig, where you can see what I'm talking about. High-level material handling, dosing, blending, everything on a level. But of course, you can already grasp it on the photo, on this picture. Handling ergonomics is a topic and a challenge in this case. So you can see that some might take days to take apart and together. In some other cases, more modern designs, you can get this in a couple of hours done. And to show this, and this is the part what I called integration, you can get offers today from well-known vendors where these unit operations are highly integrated already in a system. Like here the CDC from GEA, where you're feeding and blending and compression boxed in one housing. Or recently from Fette now, also nice combination of a dosing blending rig in combination for the tablet press. So these are combinations where I think the vendors, these are in the function of an integrator already and providing less headaches handling these interfaces, even including PET solutions like blend uniformity or content uniformity measurements. And in the extent you can get also then your tablet coding devices linked to these machines. Also here, solutions available like from GEA or from IMA, to just mention a few. But this is what I want to highlight: integration and this headache of integration. In some cases, you can get this done by vendors who offer already really ergonomically well-designed systems, where then the cleaning downtimes are considered to be hours, a shift or two, depending on how complex the change of the product is. The last step in this puzzle, and often underestimated, is controls and automation. If you buy unit operations on their own from different vendors, they come with a control system. You can have easy handshakes that one unit operation is following the others, but not really exchanging information. The more sophisticated part is then to have a SCADA system who is orchestrating these unit operations on a high level. And some companies use it conductor. The other nice word I heard is maestro, but it's the same idea and the same thing which wanted to be expressed here, that there is a SCADA system on higher level, not only coordinating these unit operations, but also consolidating batch information and talking to your PAT management systems. So you can see this is quite a complex undertaking, even more if you then go into interfaces to higher level on-site management systems, and not to talk about Industry 4.0, but this is the interface to the system. That's the, if you will, that's the brain of the system. This is where the control strategy lives. And you need also here to consider that this is at least 30-40% of your project volume on engineering time going into these integrations. But there's no mean of a continuous process if you do not really also look into your control and automation strategy, because this is what regulatory's first instance will look into. I highly recommend at this point to have really enough resources considered for this. I'm almost on the final stretch here, and I also see at my time is running down. Just a few recommendations before you go to your chessboard, looking into all the offerings out there. and your idea of your process. You should do also before you approach even vendors. Do your little math on your own, saying, okay, I have these OEE expectations. I have this process in mind. You can do some capacity mass balance calculations already, and saying, okay, this is the range I'm looking for. I think it would make the conversation to the vendors already much easier, and to your engineering team to say, okay, that's in a nutshell what I expect, and you do not need more than a drawing board or a sketch or your chessboard on a piece of paper. It doesn't take more than really high level information. Then another criteria is high level I want to give you on the way. By the way, we have seminars and training seminars for each of these unit operations. I think we could spend another hour to talk about, but there is of course more training available. But here just a couple of high level recommendations. Look at the material flow. Make sure that operator and personal movement ergonomics is really considered in doing your layout work, because this reduces downtime in ergonomics. This is a high value asset, and it's nothing worse than having a high value asset sitting there and waiting for cleaning and being complex in changing over, etc. Cleaning ergonomics, mentioned it. It can be reduced. And containment solution, of course, containment is a topic in its own right, but we see today also that these PCM solutions are going into a containment level OEB 4 to 5. So this is not a dream; it's happening. It happens. It's installed. It's really possible. And then, last but not least, sometimes also here are headaches coming up with country-specific utility requirements. So check out if your vendor portfolio you have in mind can entertain these country-specific requirements as well. So this was a kind of a fast ride through to bringing pieces together, and yeah, I hope I could provide you a little overview, some guidance how to approach this. And I'm happy to and curious to see your questions.
Richard, if you can go to the live Q&A.
Next slide. Okay. All right. No questions right now. No. Oh, can you comment on the RT real-time release? Yes, of course. I think real-time release applications are happening and are I think not so new anymore. So you can find in particular installed rigs with the innovators, the first movers in this kind of technology. They are all having real-time release strategies implemented. In 2 weeks from now, I think there's the IFPAC, where I will give a separate talk on this. But PET technology is available, and yeah, it's simply as that, it's possible to do, and this has been done. Okay, what was the next question? Show SCADA and other, are they able to? Yeah, okay. When it comes to SCADA applications, of course, I think you have to look again into the interfaces and what are the equipment PLC interfaces towards the SCADA systems. But I think there's a lot of progress. happened the last 10 years, and you can see combinations of one of the unit operations I have shown from different vendors talking one and another to the same SCADA system. So that's not magic. It had happened, and there are unified interfaces, control interfaces already established. So that's also possible, but you have to again investigate this from vendor to vendor, and also depending on what is the SCADA system you're looking into. It is again one of these interface questions I wanted to raise here. You have to have a capacity who is able to do this. Yeah. It's not simple, but it has been done. This is the short answer to your question, hopefully. What other question? There was, I think, one or more, but is there anything on the integration effort internally? That's a very nice question. I like this. You know, if you design an equipment on your own, or a system on your own, of course, you not only own these interfaces in between, you own the knowledge of it, and this gives you advantages to understand it while you're doing it. Of course, it's an effort. You can see that there are companies out there who are doing this depending on their engineering capabilities, I would say. So if you have engineering staff and resources available who can do that, there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's great. The pitfall is that, of course, also this industry and the vendor portfolios are evolving over the time. And so it's like with all kind of technologies, if you do not get fresh information from outside, fresh blood, I would say, sometimes it's outdated what has been installed. You can see this also on the control systems in particular mentioned before. Yeah. So a SCADA solution, to design a SCADA solution on your own, might give you benefits because you have this intrinsic knowledge of it, and your company intrinsic knowledge in it, but also you have to make sure to maintain this then your product for your future. If you buy it from turnkey outside, of course, you will get always the latest technology available and evolving. Yeah? So some of the key integrators I've mentioned on my slide deck, of course, they develop their knowledge over the time, and they have already a lot of integrational knowledge, which is, I think, then also an advantage. So it really needs, it highly depends on your engineering capabilities internally.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this was cleared too early. Did you answer this question?
This question I have answered. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think there was one before. I'm not sure if I saw one which saying, okay, we still hear this concern that it is difficult to have a common interface between equipment. Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, and I think this is what engineers always develop for, is you have common interfaces between these unit operations. But I think you could get a grasp seeing this huge portfolio of vendors, the different solutions out there, that if you talk about the interface, I can see this standardization coming into place for easier on the control sides rather than on the mechanical side, because also this mechanical interface is quite dependent on the place you install the equipment into. But even here, I think when it comes to standard utility and regional requirements, etc., there should be a possibility for making it more and more easier. to exchange equipment on a certain level. And there are also cases out there where companies try to make it flexible in use to interchange and swivel and switch elements, one or the other unit operation into the whole system. Yeah. So I think naturally this will develop to this kind of harmonizing interfaces over the time, but it also makes necessary that more and more this kind of technology is employed with customers. Yeah? So I think it will be a natural development there. How would you describe the benefits of a flexible versus a standard fixed one like CDC? I think this has mainly to do with the product portfolio you are looking into. So it's a strategic decision, first thing. If you have a good view and transparency of your product portfolio and what is coming down your development pipeline, then I think this answer will come automatically. I saw solutions where it was clear that the customer has only, let's say, modifications of the same kind of a recipe. So I think naturally you will see it makes absolutely sense to have a kind of a highly integrated CDC solution for this particular reason, and it's not limiting the customer in the future use of it. Also, if you multiply or triplicate this kind of unit operations, it's good to have this crystallization point, let's say. But if you, of course, are more into the innovator space where you have different treatment areas in mind and you don't know really what coming down the pipeline, of course, then the flexibility is of greater importance. And you have to see that at least in your early development installations, there's enough flexibility to switch from different unit operations in granulation technologies like I have shown. And so that's maybe one other recommendation, what is also kind of more and more seen out there, that companies use unit operations standalone in their development and start them to link them together with pneumatic conveying only, very simplistic in their developments suites, and saying we have the unit operations, we develop the process on the unit operation level, and then we combine this unit operation step by step as we learn and to go with it. And then finally, if we have this together, then we invest in the transfer or the commercialization line. Yeah, so we can see this going on in the market like that way for the more flexible installations. Yeah, I hope this was a solid answer for your question.